Hi, welcome. We're glad you're here. If you were with us last time, Mark left us with one big question after Jesus calmed the storm. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him?
These next chapters start answering that question, but they raise so many more about faith, identity, and what it actually means to follow Jesus.
Mark 5 opens up with Jesus crossing into Gentile territory. And if you're not familiar with the Bible, a Gentile is basically anyone who wasn't Jewish. And that is important to note here because he wasn't trying to avoid them. He never avoided them. He intentionally went to them.
And the first person Jesus encounters is a man living amongst the tombs. He's isolated, hurting, and alone. Oh, and he's also possessed by demons.
He's chained, feared, and alone. This is someone who everyone has said is beyond help. But Jesus doesn't hesitate. He moves toward him.
What's really interesting is that the demons recognize Jesus right away. And that always got me because the demons knew, but everyone around him is still trying to figure out who he is.
Once the man is healed, the town reacts with fear and not relief, like you would expect.
And they actually beg Jesus to leave. And that's because sometimes it's easier to stay in the sucky situation that you're in than accept the fact that something may be greater as long as you follow it.
And then Mark gives us two very human stories. One about a woman who's been sick for 12 years and one about a girl who has just died.
You know, both situations would make anybody feel hopeless and untouchable. But Jesus steps in without hesitation and full of grace and compassion.
The woman who has been ill for so long reaches out in faith, believing if she can just touch Jesus' robe, she will be healed. In Mark chapter 5, verse 34, Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace."
And next, when people tell Jairus to leave Jesus alone and not to bother him because his daughter is already dead, Jesus responds in Mark 5:36, "Do not be afraid, only believe."
Both stories show us that faith doesn't have to be loud or perfect. It's just showing up and trusting God anyway.
Chapter 6 opens with Jesus returning to his hometown, Nazareth. And continuing with the theme of this chapter, people just can't seem to get over who they think he is.
They've known him for years, and instead of being open, they dismiss him. They can't separate who he is now from who he used to be. And he responds with Mark chapter 6, verse 4. He says, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home."
And now Jesus sends the disciples out 2 by 2, and he leaves them with this bit of wisdom. In Mark 6, verse 11, he says, "And whoever will not receive you nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city." Basically, don't beg them to hear you and walk away if they don't want to listen.
Mark tells us here that John the Baptist has been executed. We will cover this in more detail in a later video. What's important to note, though, here is that following God doesn't always lead to comfort.
Now, Jesus feeds a massive crowd with only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. In Mark 6:41, he says, "And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all, so that all ate and were filled."
Even after feeding this huge crowd of 5,000 people, they still had 12 baskets of fish and bread left over.
And now comes the part to where we've all heard it 1,000 times. Jesus walks on water. And you know, even though we've heard it 1,000 times, I don't think we ever sit there and think about how shocking it must have been to witness.
The disciples are terrified right now, like they'd seen a ghost. Shockingly, they have seen Jesus perform miracle after miracle, and they still fully don't know who he is.
Mark 7 shifts towards a conversation of religion and heart.
The religious leaders get upset because the disciples aren't following their traditions, the ones that they're expected to follow.
Mark 7:6 is where Jesus completely flips the script. He says, "Well, did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me."
He explains it's not what goes into a person that defiles them, it's what comes out of them.
You know, Jesus keeps showing his compassion, this time with a Gentile woman's daughter and then a deaf man.
Jesus isn't just for one group of people. His mercy reaches everyone.
Mark 8 opens up with Jesus again showing his compassion. He not only is feeding a large crowd of 4,000 with just 7 loaves of bread and a few small fishes. In Mark 8, verse 2, he says, "I have compassion on the multitudes because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat."
Then the Pharisees come. The Pharisees were the religious leaders who were angry with Jesus and the disciples because they didn't follow traditions. They try to dispute Jesus and tell him to show them a sign. Jesus' response is perfect. In Mark chapter 8, verse 12, Jesus says, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation."
Mark continues along with the disciples still not fully understanding who Jesus is. To summarize Mark 8, 17 through 21, Jesus warns the disciples that even after witnessing God's provision firsthand, they're still missing the bigger spiritual picture because their hearts are focused on scarcity instead of faith.
After this, they continue on to Bethsaida, where Jesus heals a blind man. He takes the blind man by the hand from the village. He spits on his eyes, puts his hands over his eyes, and he asks the blind man if he can see clearly. The blind man says that the people walking around he can see, but they look like trees. So Jesus once again puts his hands over the blind man's eyes, and at this point, his vision is fully restored and he can see 100%.
In Mark 8:27, Jesus says, "Who do men say that I am?" In verse 28, the disciples answer, "John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others say you're one of the prophets." In verse 29, Jesus says, "But who do you say that I am?" And now Peter answers, "You are the Christ."
Now the reality of what's to come is told to the disciples. Jesus explains very clearly and plainly that he will be killed but rise again in 3 days. Peter gets very upset. He actually pulls Jesus aside and begins to rebuke him. But Jesus rebukes Peter in return. And in Mark chapter 8, verse 33, Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but only the things of man."
Chapter 8 closes with Jesus giving us the answer on how to save our soul. He says, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up the cross and follow me." He isn't talking about a physical cross. He's talking about the baggage you carry, the sins you hold on to. The best way to live is to give it all to God. And it's the only way to have eternal life. If we summarize Mark 5 through 8, it's about desperate faith, growing challenges, and Jesus slowly revealing what it means to follow him.
We see miracles, compassion, rejection, and hard truth all woven together. And we're brought back again to that same question. Who do you say that he is?
Next time, we'll talk about how the disciples are struggling with their fear, failure, and hope.
Until then, think about these 2 questions. What might he be asking you to surrender? And how would your life look different if you truly followed him without holding back?
And if you enjoyed watching this, please like and subscribe. And if you know somebody that may benefit from this, please share it with them.
And remember, you're not walking this path alone. Keep seeking and trust God to work in your heart.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.